What if I told you that thousands of Christians out there genuinely believe they've repented, but they never actually did? What if the tears you cry during worship on Sunday morning are not proof that anything inside you has changed? What if asking for forgiveness every single day, over and over again, doesn't mean your heart has moved even 1 inch? There is a verse in the Bible. One verse. And when you really sit with it, it has the potential to completely undo the way most people understand what it means to turn back to God. Not in a discouraging way. In a freeing way. But it's going to ask something of you. And here's the thing, this isn't something I made up. This isn't my opinion or some new teaching somebody invented. This has been sitting right there in the Bible the whole time. Most people just never had anyone point it out to them the way it deserves to be pointed out. So before we go any further, I want to ask you to do something. Go down to the comments right now and write, "I want a transformed heart." That's it. Just those 5 words. Not for me. Not for anyone watching this. But as a declaration between you and God. Sometimes the first step toward real change is just saying out loud, or in this case, writing it out, that you actually want it. Okay. Let's talk about something that doesn't get brought up enough in church. A lot of people, and I mean a lot, are living in this loop. This exhausting, demoralizing cycle that goes something like this. You mess up. You do the thing you said you weren't going to do again. Then comes the guilt. That heavy feeling sitting on your chest. That voice in the back of your head reminding you of what you did. So you pray. You tell God you're sorry. You mean it when you say it, at least in that moment you do. You promise to change. You feel better. Maybe you even feel close to God for a little while. And then, you fall right back into it. And the whole thing starts over. If you've been in that loop, and I think most of us have been there at some point, you already know how discouraging it gets. Because it starts to feel like nothing is actually changing. Like you're just spinning your wheels. Here's something worth considering. There is a real possibility that what many people call repentance isn't actually repentance at all. The false version produces emotion. The real version produces transformation. And those are not the same thing. A lot of people cry because of what they did. And that's understandable. But crying about a mistake and actually walking away from it, those are 2 very different things. And the thing that makes it so discouraging isn't just that you keep falling. It's that you start to wonder whether you're even capable of actually changing. You start to question whether your faith is real. Whether God is even listening. Whether this is just how it's always going to be. But I want to offer a different possibility. What if the problem isn't your faith? What if the problem is that what you've been calling repentance isn't actually what the Bible describes as repentance? What if the cycle keeps going not because change is impossible for you, but because the kind of sorrow you've been carrying hasn't been pointed in the right direction? That's not a condemnation. That's actually an invitation. If you recognize that cycle in your own life, drop a like on this right now. Because this message needs to reach people who are stuck in it. Here's where I think the confusion starts. Most people have been told that feeling bad about something is the same as repenting from it. But those 2 things are actually not the same, and understanding the difference could genuinely shift something for you. Think about it like this. Guilt, or what the Bible might call worldly sorrow, is mostly focused on the fallout. It's feeling awful because you got caught. It's being scared of what happens next. It's worrying about your reputation, about what people think of you, about the consequences you're about to face. That's not nothing. That's a real feeling. But by itself, it doesn't lead anywhere good. Repentance, real repentance, is something completely different. The word itself, in the original language of the New Testament, actually means a change of mind. Not just a change of feeling. A change of the way you think about something. And when your thinking changes, your direction changes. And when your direction changes, your behavior follows. Here's the part that gets people. Both of these things can look exactly the same from the outside. Both of them can involve crying. Both of them can involve apology. Both of them can involve the promise to do better. The difference isn't in how they look. The difference is in what happens next. There's a story in the Bible that shows this side by side. 2 men. Both of them made serious mistakes. Both of them felt terrible about it. Judas felt so bad about what he did that he couldn't live with himself. He was overwhelmed with grief. And yet that grief led him nowhere except deeper into despair. Peter, on the other hand, also fell apart after his mistake. He walked away and wept. But something different happened inside of him. He came back. He was restored. He went on to become one of the most significant figures in the early church. Both men cried. Only one of them was transformed. That's not a coincidence. That's the difference between two kinds of sorrow, one that turns you toward God, and one that only turns inward. So here's the verse. Here's the one I mentioned at the beginning. And I want you to actually hear it, not just let it pass over you. 2 Corinthians, chapter 7, verse 10. For godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief produces spiritual decline. Read that again if you need to. Let it settle. There are two kinds of sorrow described here. Two kinds. And they lead to completely opposite places. Godly grief, sorrow that comes from an honest awareness of how your choices have affected your relationship with God and with others, that kind of grief actually moves you. It produces something. It leads to a genuine turning. Worldly grief, sorrow that's mostly about you, about how bad you feel, about your guilt, about the consequences you're facing, that kind of grief by itself just produces more pain. It doesn't lead anywhere transformative. Now here's what I think is important to say. I'm not claiming I know exactly what's happening in anyone's heart. That's not something any of us can fully see, not even in ourselves sometimes. But this verse gives us a framework for asking honest questions. What kind of sorrow have I mostly been living in? Am I grieving over my choices because they've damaged something sacred? Or am I mostly just feeling bad about the fallout? Those are uncomfortable questions. But they're worth sitting with. Now here's what I think is important to say. I'm not claiming I know exactly what's happening in anyone's heart. That's not something any of us can fully see, not even in ourselves sometimes. But this verse gives us a framework for asking honest questions. What kind of sorrow have I mostly been living in? Am I grieving over my choices because they've damaged something sacred? Or am I mostly just feeling bad about the fallout? Those are uncomfortable questions. But they're worth sitting with. Because here's the thing, the verse doesn't say that emotion is bad. It doesn't say that feeling guilty is wrong. It's saying that not all sorrow leads to the same place. And if you've been carrying guilt for years without seeing real movement in your life, it might be worth asking whether the kind of grief you've been experiencing is actually the kind that produces change. Because if the sorrow you've been carrying is mostly the worldly kind, the kind that loops back into guilt without actually producing change, then what you've been experiencing might not be repentance in the fullest sense of that word. And that's not meant to make you feel worse. It's meant to open a door. All right. I want to walk through 5 things that, based on what the Bible describes, might suggest someone is caught in false repentance. This isn't a checklist to beat yourself up with. Think of it more like a mirror. First one. You ask for forgiveness, but you haven't actually stepped away from the habit. The pattern keeps continuing. The same choices keep getting made. And the prayer for forgiveness becomes almost automatic, like a ritual that makes you feel better without requiring anything of you. Second one. What bothers you most isn't the choice itself. It's the aftermath. You're not so much troubled by the thing you did as you are by how it made you look, or how it made you feel, or what it cost you. The issue isn't the action, it's the consequences. Third one. There's change for a little while, and then it goes right back. Maybe for a few days, even a few weeks, something is genuinely different. But then slowly, quietly, you end up right back where you started. The behavior returns. The patterns reassert themselves. And the whole thing resets. Fourth one. What you're actually looking for is relief, not transformation. You want the guilt to stop. You want the heavy feeling to lift. You want to feel okay again. And prayer becomes a way to get that relief, not necessarily a genuine turning toward something different. Fifth one. You want the forgiveness, but you're not really open to what comes with it. Real forgiveness, in the biblical sense, isn't just God overlooking what happened. It's restoration, which involves actually moving in a different direction. But if the direction doesn't change, that's worth noticing. Again, This isn't a list to condemn anyone. I'd encourage you to take it seriously, though, because I think a lot of people are genuinely confused about why they keep ending up in the same places. If any of that hit home, feel free to leave a comment. I want to change for real. Think of it less as a comment and more as a prayer. A public one. Here's where things get hopeful. Because the point isn't just to identify what's gone sideways. The point is to understand what's actually possible. When someone genuinely repents, when that change of mind the Bible talks about actually happens, the effects tend to be visible. Not performed. Not put on for anyone's benefit. Just real. Priorities shift. The things that used to take up all your mental energy start to feel less important. New things start to matter more. Relationships change. The people you spend time with, the conversations you have, the places you go, those tend to drift in a different direction when your heart is actually moving. Habits get replaced. Not overnight. Not without effort. But there's a genuine trajectory. A direction of movement. Decisions start to reflect something different. Not perfectly, but consistently. The way you handle money, time, words, relationships, you start making choices that line up with what you say you believe. There are a few examples in the Bible that are worth thinking about here. There's a man named Zacchaeus. He was a tax collector, and in that culture and time, that basically meant he had built his whole life around taking advantage of people. But after an encounter with Jesus, he didn't just say he was sorry. He made it right. Publicly. Financially. Practically. There's Paul, who spent a significant portion of his life actively working against the very thing he later devoted his life to. The transformation was so complete that people who knew him before had a hard time believing it was the same person. There's Peter, who we already talked about, the one who fell apart and came back and didn't just return to where he was before, but became something more. In all of these cases, the repentance wasn't just a feeling. It wasn't just an emotional moment. It showed up in how they lived. In all of these cases, the repentance wasn't just a feeling. It wasn't just an emotional moment. It showed up in how they lived. In concrete, practical, visible ways. And I think that matters because we live in a culture that has become very comfortable with emotional moments as endpoints. We go to a service, something moves us, we feel something real, and then we go home and nothing changes on Monday. The emotional experience becomes the destination instead of the starting point. But what the Bible seems to describe as genuine repentance is less of a destination and more of a pivot. A turning point that actually sends you in a different direction from that point forward. And that's worth holding on to. Because it means real change isn't just theoretical. It's something that actually happens to actual people. When the heart genuinely changes, and this is something the Bible suggests, not something I'm guaranteeing, the behavior tends to follow. This part is the one I really want you to sit with. What is it in your life that hasn't changed? Not what you've worked on. Not what you've made progress with. What has stayed exactly the same, year after year, while everything else around you has moved? What are you still justifying? We are all incredibly good at explaining away the things we don't want to look at too closely. We've got reasons, context, circumstances, things that make the pattern feel understandable, even reasonable. What is it that you keep building that case for? And maybe the deepest question of all, what has God already spoken to you about that you haven't fully responded to yet? Because sometimes, and I say this gently, the issue isn't that we don't know. It's that we haven't decided. We've had the information. We've felt the pull in a different direction. We've even known, somewhere inside, what needs to change. But we haven't made the actual decision to move. You might not need another message, another book, another podcast, another sermon. You might just need to decide. That's a hard thing to say. And an even harder thing to hear. But I think there are people watching this right now who know exactly what I'm talking about. Let me bring this back around. Guilt is not repentance. They're not the same thing. Emotion is not transformation. You can feel deeply and still not change. Tears are not a guarantee that anything has shifted. Feeling bad about something is not the same as walking away from it. That's not meant to be harsh. It's meant to be honest. And here's what I believe, what I think the Bible is pointing toward. God isn't looking for people who have it all together. He's not waiting for you to reach some level of perfection before he can work in your life. He's looking for people who are actually willing to move. Willing. That's the word. Not perfect. Not finished. Just genuinely open to going in a different direction. If this hit something in you today, I'd love for you to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next on this channel. And if you know someone who's been stuck in that cycle, the guilt, the apology, the same patterns, the guilt again, share this with them. Not to call them out. Just to give them something worth thinking about. And in the comments, if you're ready, write this: today I choose transformation. Not because it's a magic phrase, but because saying it, meaning it, might be the beginning of something real for you. Because real repentance doesn't just change how you feel in the moment. It changes who you become over time.